Hello and welcome to The Secret Mind. My name is Julian, and this today is a further episode of my police memoir, Unpunished, and it is a piece about the differences between psychiatric inpatient assessment and assessment that you might do as a police doctor in the cells, and if there's anything that you can offer while you're there other than the minimum. Here we go. This is Unpunished. It's called Bothering. If the chapter gets a title, I'm going to call it Bothering. During psychiatric inpatient assessment, I feel sure that the general public assume that there is some intensive process going on, but ask a patient and they'll frequently tell you that there's next to nothing going on. You might imagine a place of intense therapy. There are no eyelid retractors, no orderly moisturizing your conjunctiva. Yes, there may be tranquilizers, but hopefully not rampantly overused, and even the brain-frying electroconvulsive therapy is held back for special occasions, and very effective it can be too. No, mostly it's time. The time they spend being assessed in a psychiatric hospital is just time spent being, while being located there. The sun goes up and down a few times, and somehow some resolution occurs. Some may argue that it is a factor of the displacement from the toxicity of the patient's previous environment, but a hospital is somewhat of a last resort. Maybe there will be a meeting once a week and consideration given to a minor adjustment of medication as the clock ticks down. Maybe they'll even imagine in this thoroughly artificial environment that outcomes were genuinely changed for the better, something demonstrably useful that would multiply in the life outside, but that sort of intensive, personally tailored therapy, I fear, is rare. Never has a specialty used the tincture of time to miss so much opportunity. But then perhaps they don't call it an assessment period for nothing. It isn't called a treatment period. But why not try to take the opportunity to deliver some lasting change? Short-staffed? Too busy? Heard it. So I'm faced with staff not skilled enough to communicate a decent handover, not skilled to be able to manage a tantrum from a patient they do have. I add these new observations to my years of seeing people in unfriendly environments and my personal experience in psychiatry attachments of a lack of process that delivers long-lasting strategic change. It's no wonder we're not doing very well with mental health. So here we are, in a backward step, a patient withdrawn from that controlled environment to a different type of custody, police custody. And yet, even in a police cell, you can do some brief interventions. And I have the luxury of checking what I think is going on by, hey, get this, asking the patient. Yes, the too mad to handle approach from the bargain basement then of historical history-taking. As the nurse couldn't tell me anything about their plan, perhaps the patient could. Inevitably, nobody had told him that there is a plan for change. I would have been surprised if he'd been aware of one. I ask everybody, and the answer is always the same, and each such real-world experiment verifies your perspective in favour of the consistency in the reports of multiple patients. I constantly use them to verify their experiences for me so I can colour in my pictures of their journey. Ironically, it's the specialist that has such limited patient contact time for whom it must be close to impossible for them to understand the patient's journey. It's no wonder they're drawn into minor changes of medication in order to cleverly dispatch many of the already infrequent review appointments. This makes a stranger remarkably well placed to look at things a little differently, head-on, in close-up and full colour, eye to beady eye. Anybody wanting to defend the opposite position at this point will probably call me deluded. But I have hope for these patients, and I do believe that I'm bringing something to the party. I've spent time understanding the different environments in play. I've done my time working in psychiatric hospitals. I've spent 5 years as a full-time forensic medical examiner with days full of guests from psychiatry's toughest caseload. I'll let you decide whether you call those patients difficult or challenging. Both descriptions are nuanced. The fact is that you see these patients repeatedly and end up with more face-to-face time than many of their regular caseworkers. That, of course, is not the same as formally reviewing their entire engagement with healthcare, because that is not the nature of the job. In theory, that responsibility falls to their GP. You simply just get to see them repeatedly. But that is very meaningful, particularly if you bother to try an intervention with them. If you have the skills and you've retained the hope that something can change, in my view, you should try. Bother. I know. Deluded, right? At first glance, there would be no point. Why bother? All the county's resources have led us to this point, trapped in a police cell. You are not their nominated GP, caseworker, or psychiatrist. What would a lowly police doctor add to that heady mix of professionals? Well, failure is failure. The responsibility starts with the person in the room. If that's me, then it's me. If it's you, then it's you. I can almost hear the sneering now. Try your intervention, doctor, if you think it'll make a difference. Okay, I will. But let me tell you this. When the patient/detainee reminds you of the last time you saw them, and reminds you of the intervention you made, then you know something changed. They remembered what you did. They remembered that you tried. They remember that you bothered. And they remember because they were engaged, perhaps even impressed that you took the trouble. They remembered, even if you didn't. Their recall may be a revelation to you. I've already mentioned that the patient's medical record is not easily available, but the notes we make as police doctors are paper-based rather than computerized, so assessments by previous police doctors are not accessible either. The patient is your notebook. They are reminding you. It's a relationship, remember? They are your personal audit. Alongside your basic medical assessment, you can offer patients what might best be called brief interventions. These can vary from direct advice, hopefully inspirationally given, exploiting rapport, behavioral suggestions and improvements, use of story and metaphor, life hacks, elements of coaching, reframing, aspects of anchoring and neuro-linguistic programming, amongst many, many others. This is what bothering looks like. The receiver frequently feels that somebody is bothering about them. Bother is good. Bothering is magic. They have no intrinsic cost. They can be initiated immediately alongside the medical assessment or follow on opportunistically from it. The look and engagement in the patient's eyes more often than not told me they've never been exposed to these botherings under their formulaic care package. If, on rare occasions, a psychologist had tried similar things, I was always keen to know why they didn't land. To avoid the risk of writing another 10,000 words on that question alone, I'll summarize that very limited techniques were too rigidly applied in relationships that lacked rapport and a shared space of belief in change. Read that again. Without common ground, there is no place for hope to lie in wait. And hope is a major accelerator for change. It works both ways, but we have to give hope a leg up when we can. So the detainees don't remember the 28 days in a psychiatric hospital. And they're not all spaced out on zombie juice, I trust. But 15 minutes, well spent, in custody or anywhere else, and it can stay with them. And better still, you can check that it did, because they will tell you, long after you've forgotten yourself. If that isn't enough to mandate that you continue bothering, then I don't know what is. If you read this and it's not enough to make you want to get the skills to be able to start, then I don't know who you are. When they recognize me, tell me what I said, what it meant to them, and allow me to recognize the patterns of my own words coming back at me, that is the ultimate feedback. In a world where doctors have been battered into a universally disliked formal feedback system each year, the reality is that this is the only feedback that matters. Patients don't volunteer these things because they're flattering you. They say it because they mean it. They're experienced enough to know the difference between individuals who bother with them and a system that they often feel doesn't see them. So we owe them that one final duty: not to brush their positive feedback aside. We all know that we are the best doctor that patient X has ever seen, so much better than that terrible Dr. Y. Yet, we all know that paradoxically, any doctor worth their salt would trade 1,000 compliments for avoidance of a single complaint. But just occasionally, in the face of some rare positive feedback, you must allow that single endorphin to discharge, a single molecule of dopamine to be released, even if you then must briefly chastise yourself for your vanity and get on to the next patient. It will help the somebody that you help and help up next. Over the years, I've been able to see these characters come back. Most of my colleagues look upon this as a task-driven job on the face of it that has no continuity, but I've been able to prove to myself that you can do something, and with lasting effect. It's driven me to find more and more techniques to deploy in those privileged moments to help them build up the resilience that edges them towards a better, less anxious life. It comes down to this: start and be imaginative. See you tomorrow.